Hello friends, welcome to JavaEE EJB-JPA tutorial. Now you are watching part 3 of the subseries JPAQL. So now we are going to implement the very first search, searching the account by its account ID. So these are all the videos from our these are all the slide decks from our previous videos. So in our previous video we created the HTML form and we talked about all the controls for the HTML form, and in the previous video we displayed this form also. Now we will go ahead and implement our first search. Here if you see, we are getting all the form field information based on the name. So PID, you know what it is, and we are storing it as a string PID. Then get parameter, submit 1, submit 2, submit 3, as well as submit 4. So these are all the name, right? And value is a search for all these 1, 2, 3. So here we are using the name submit 1, submit 2, submit 3. Suppose if user entered a person name and they clicked the search on that particular row and we named that as submit 2, this will return and we will have a valid string here. In submit 2 we will be having the search, that's the value. What happens to submit 1 and submit 3? User is not clicking those, right? Those are submit buttons. So it won't have the string value of search. Instead we will be having null. So this is the way we know which submit button is clicked by the user. Alright, there are other field, and if you see, this is person name, balance, and balance search. So do not worry much about the validations. We did partial validation. It's just a demo. So wherever we want to put record code, only those code we added, and we doesn't make this more complex by putting lots of validation. All right. Next, if you see, we have web servlet, and inside the web servlet only we are getting these form field information, and in the web servlet query savings account, that's where the form is submitting the data, right? In the previous video we saw the form action is taking place on this web servlet, and we are marking this web servlet with a annotation EJB enterprise Java bean and saving AC bean. So this bean we used in our previous examples also. The same bean we are using it here. So EJB annotation, and here we are giving the mapped name. Then we are instantiating the bean, saving AC bean remote and SAC bean. So here we are declaring the remote bean, and at runtime we actually have the actual bean that is pointed by this proxy. So all these stuffs are explained in our subseries 1 and 2. Alright, this is our search account, and if you see here we are talking about submit, right? 1, 2 and 3. So we named these differently. So here we gave the even though input type is submit and value is search, we deferred this search button by its name. So 1, the name here is submit, here the name is submit 2, and here the name is submit 3. Alright, this will be the submit 4. So in the bean implementation, if you see, here we are going to implement this particular row. So other stuff we will implement in the next video. For now, let's concentrate on this very first row. So user will type a account ID 2, then they will click search, and we will retrieve the entity and display it. So in our remote bean, if you see query by ID, that's the function name we declared, and that it takes person banking ID. So the text field we talked about, right? And the name is PID. So that's what here it is receiving as a parameter, and it returns a saving account entity. So once user types something called 100, that will get passed here by our servlet. So in the previous code, we just shown the form processing only, and we will revisit that servlet. Before that, here we talk about the bean implementation. So this will be in the remote bean. Here is the implementation. So since this is a key field, here we haven't written any JPA query language. Instead, we are using entity manager dot find. So this EM we saw in the previous code. So when we go to code, that time we will see this is bean. EM is marked even in the advanced stage. It will not be in the servlet, it will be in the bean. And since here we are showing only the bean method and method implementation, you are not seeing EM. There will be a persistent unit annotation that defines the entity manager. We will see that, and in our previous subseries also we used it. Anyhow, when we go to demo, that time we will see em.find. This find method also we used previously. Here, if you see saving account class dot, the type dot class we are passing, that means here we are telling the entity what entity we are dealing with, or which entity we want to find. We want to find savings account entity, and the parameter what we are passing is the banking ID. So this will be the key field, and entity manager will uniquely identifies the record in the database and returns that, and we are storing that in the savings account reference. Then we are returning that to the caller as well. Return value, right? We are returning that to the caller. So that's all. We declared a method and we implemented it. Next, we need to call this bean method from the servlet. And if you see, we already retrieved the form field data. First, we are checking, because our search is based on PID, right? We are checking PID should not be null. We are checking the trim also and checking the length. Why? Because if user puts some blank space and performs a search, PID is still not valid, right? So that's why here we are checking not equal to null, as well as even if it is typed something, we are trimming it and make sure user typed, if user only typed blank space, we are skipping that. Then if a PID is given, we need to make sure submit is not null. That means user clicked the submit one. So this may not be required. Anyhow, here we validated that. Then we are checking this also, submit one dot equal ignore case search. So you can even minimize these if conditions. 1 or 2 is enough. PID not equal to null, and this one is enough. But anyhow, for safe purpose, you can keep all together. So in the form processing, if you see PID we already have, we are creating a new integer and converting that string form of a PID entered in the form by the user, and we convert that into the integer. Then we pass this integer to our saving account bean. So annotation you already saw in the previous slides. at EJB mapped name we gave, and we created the instance. So their declaration shows only the remote proxy, and through remote proxy here saving account bean dot query by ID. So this is the function we declared in our bean. Now we are invoking that and we are passing the personal banking ID. We know that this query by ID makes use of entity manager em.find, and it retrieves the savings account, and we are storing that here inside the servlet. Next we do the dispatching and request.set attribute account, because it returns a single account, right? One account it will retrieve, and that account we are storing under the name account. Under the request context we are setting this information. Then we make use of get request dispatcher for our JSP. This JSP we have to create. We haven't yet created it. Query result by ID or name. So here we return this JSP to display a single entity. So when we search by name, it may return multiple also. For our demo, we are assuming the names also unique. Okay, so for single entity, so we will code this query result by ID or name JSP to deal with the single entity. So this JSP will make use of this request attribute account, retrieves the content account, then it will display it. Alright, from servlet, after setting this set attribute, we make call to our request dispatcher, and we will forward the response and request to that JSP file. So these request dispatcher, all those stuffs are already covered in our servlet as well as JSP playlist, and here we no need to dig too much deep into it. But what you can understand is this servlet will receive request as well as a response. After doing some initial processing, these are all the processing, it forwards the request as well as a response, or it dedicates the presentation work to the JSP file by forwarding the request and response. So we get the dispatcher and we delegate the task. We forward the request and response to the JSP. So in JSP, if you see, we need a savings account, right? Why? Because in our request attribute we are setting the savings account. So here we refer that savings account from our tube coding examples JPA entity. So this entity we created as part of subseries 3, I guess. Long back we created it, and we are still using the entity. So here we put an import statement in our JSP page directive, then request dot get attribute. So our servlet is setting this account, right? So it sets this account request attribute by contacting the bean layer. So the bean layer will make use of entity manager. It performs entity manager dot find. It retrieves the account by ID. Then the retrieved value is received by the servlet, and servlet will create a request attribute, and under the request attribute it stores that JPA entity under the name account. Then it forwards the call to the JSP presentation, and JSP presentation, if you see, there servlet is doing the set attribute. Here we are doing the get attribute, and we are retrieving the account, and we are typecasting it, then we are storing it under the account, savings account. After that we form, these are all the static heading tag, then there is a division. So this is for formatting. We want to set all the style attributes, so we created the division. Division in the sense a divider, or div tag of HTML we are using it. Then account ID, all other stuff for formatting. What is important is this piece of information. So entity we are setting it as the attribute in the servlet. Here we are retrieving it. Then this will be the JSP expression account.getPID. So we know that our entity supports getter and setters, right? So we make use of those getters, get PID, get person name, and get balance. Here we put one dot to state that we printed the information. Alright, so these are all the expression language, and from our entity we are reading this information and we are displaying it. Now we will go to Eclipse and we will implement the first set of changes. So don't get disappointed that we are not using JPAQL here in this particular part. In the next coming videos we will be using the JPA query language. Since here it's a PID based search, instead of using JPAQL, it's very efficient to use the entity manager.find method. So here is our Eclipse IDE. As part of our EJB web project, we need to create a new servlet. So the servlet is here, query savings AC. So this is the HTML we created right in the previous video. So now I'm choosing new servlet. So if you see here, method is post. Let me copy it again. The dialog get dismissed somehow. We'll invoke it again. So since the method is post, we need to override the post. First I'm choosing the servlet package here. Then class name, we will give it as a query savings AC. Next, so this will be our servlet name, and we'll click next. We don't want do get, we will override only the do post. Since the method is post, we are overriding the post method. Here I am choosing the finish. We'll do the cleanup. So in the do post, first we need to get the form field data, and you can refer the form field. Say for example, get parameter PID. So this is the PID input field. So it will be in the very first row, account ID, static text, then input PID, after that submit one. So this one we need to make a import tube coding examples JPA entity. So that will resolve. So likewise we are retrieving all other form field information. Next, at the form level, I mean in the servlet level, we will declare annotation EJB from JavaEE EJB. Then this will be from our tube coding example EJB stateless bean. So here we are referring our EJB annotation. We are not using the lookup method. In our initial videos we used naming .lookup, and here we use the annotation to directly get the bean instance in our servlet. Alright, so we have form field data and we have a reference to our bean also. Now we will go to our EJB bean. We will come back here later. So in the bean client, we will, it's a stateless bean, hello bean, this we initially learned, so saving account bean. And if you see, this is a subseries 3, subseries 4, subseries 5, and how we are developing this saving account bean as part of our previous sub-series. You can see those. Now we declare query by ID. So this is part of sub-series 6, code snippet 4. So here we declared our query by ID and it returns a savings account. Once you declare this method, you will be seeing an error in the implementation bean. So this red mark will help you locate that. So this is our implementation. We have to implement our newly declared method. So now we are implementing the query by ID. The code was already explained in the slide. You can see entity manager.find we are using, and we are returning the retrieved saving account to the caller. So the caller will be our servlet. So this is the servlet. We'll go there. We left it here right at code snippet 3. This is 2, 3, 4. We declared a method. 5. We implemented the method, and we are going back to our servlet. Alright. So this is our do post, right? Do post to override. Form field data are retrieved. Now we will perform the operation. Here we are just checking the if condition to make sure all the required data are available. Then based on this condition, we came to know that user clicked the submit one. That means the submit button in the very first row. Since the click is a submit button in the very first row, then we may be expecting the PID. So that's also valid. Here we are making call to our bean method, query by ID. So query by ID through remote interface, it goes or it lands here, and we will be retrieving the savings account by means of entity manager.find. That's it. Once we have the account of type savings account, we set that savings account to the request context using the set attribute method. So in our JSP, we will use get attribute. We already saw that in the PowerPoint slide. Next, we will be implementing this. So I will be copying it to the clipboard. Request dispatcher is from javax.servlet, and here we are making the forward. Alright, now it's time to implement the JSP file, new JSP file, and if you are not seeing that in the list, always do a search here, JSP file, next. So if you see here, in the CJP tutorial, we are not using the JSP tag, custom tag, all those stuff. So if you want to know all this stuff, we have a separate playlist. So under that JSP playlist, we covered creating custom tag, all those stuff. So if you use these custom tags, it will be even more reusable, but it will add more complexity to our current learning. So that's why we are using simple and plain JSP files. Alright, query result by ID or name, and we will use this template JSP with HTML markup, and we will click finish. So after this page directive, this is 7, right? After this page directive, we will add the code snippet to refer the saving account instance. Why? Because we need to read the saving account from this request context. So when the moment we ask for a get attribute account, it will be giving us the saving account. So that's why first we put the import statement here. So in the very first tag of the body, if you see request.get attribute, here we are doing the request.set attribute, name we are giving it as account, the same stuff here we are retrieving it under the JSP file. also remember this request is forwarded by our servlet. Here is the request, it is forwarding. So in the request it is setting the attribute, then forwarding the same request, and when it is the same request is retrieved here. So these are all the built-in object for the JSP. So since it's a forwarded request and we are using the same request object get attribute account, we are passing and we are retrieving the savings account. Once a saving account is in hand, you can write a normal HTML. And if you see, when we create this HTML, first we created the HTML using any online editor, or you can use any editor you want. You can create a static HTML. After that, wherever it needs a dynamic content, there you can replace. So when we created it, we created with a different div style and background color, all those stuff. Here we actually placed a static text. So account ID 15, name ABC123, and balance minus 12,000. Whatever we want, we can keep. After that, you have to replace that static with the dynamic content. So that's how we formatted it. And if you see, once a saving account is in hand, we are using the JSP expression language %, then we are reading the account.getPID, account.getPname, account.getBalance. So account is nothing but our entity, right? From that entity we are using the getter version and we are reading the person ID, name and balance, and we are displaying that. Now we will run this and test. First we will start the server. So I'm pausing this video. So if you see, while fly is started, we will publish our application. Click on finish. In the meantime, we will connect to our database. So at present we have 4 rows of data. Now we go here. So we can see started and synchronized, and in our EJB web, under web content, under web content we will go for search account form. So these code snippets you can download it from the video description. The video description lands you to the Google Drive. From there you can download the file. So we implemented this first part, right? Let us test this. I'll be giving account ID, person ID as 2. I'm clicking search here, and it shows account ID is 2, owned by Raman number, balance is 7,700. So here I'll be seeing that detail. So Moni Menon 6 person ID, we will give that as well. Going back here, I'm giving 6. I'm choosing search, and it shows account ID is 6, owned by Moni Menon, balance is 1,400. And since it's a search by ID, you can see only one entity is retrieved, and that entity information is read here in our JSP file. using the getter method, and the informations are formatted and presented. Now we will stop our component. This will undeploy the EJB EAR. After the undeployment, we can stop our server. So it may take some time, wait for it, and once it is stopped, so we will close all this. We can remove it. So after removing the component, stop the server. So that's all here in this video. We implemented our first search, and in the next 2-3 search requires JPAQL, and you will be seeing how we are using the JPAQL. Thanks again for watching. Bye.